Millionaire took his secretary to his ex-fiancée's wedding, and what she did shocked everyone. As the ceremony commences in grand style, all eyes are on the millionaire and his unexpected companion. The air is filled with intrigue, and whispers ripple through the crowd as guests ponder the significance of his choice. The atmosphere is charged with suspense, as everyone wonders what role the secretary will play in this dramatic encounter.
Michael leaned back in his leather chair, his sharp blue eyes narrowing as memories of Olivia surfaced. She had been everything he thought he wanted, stunning, poised, and ambitious. Their breakup, however, had been less about passion and more about practicality. She craved stability and tradition, while Michael thrived on risk and the pursuit of his ever-expanding empire. Her choice to leave him for a wealthy banker had cut deeper than he cared to admit. "Why would she even send this?" Michael muttered, tossing the card onto his desk with disdain. "Perhaps she thinks you'd be gracious enough to congratulate her," came a calm, measured voice. Emma Hayes, Michael's secretary, stood in the doorway, holding a tablet and a notepad. Her presence was a stark contrast to his stormy mood. Clad in her usual understated attire, Emma exuded quiet confidence. Michael smirked, leaning forward. "Gracious? I don't do gracious, Emma. She knows that." Emma raised an eyebrow, unperturbed by his biting tone. "Then don't go. It's a wedding, not a business deal. You can just decline." Her words lingered in the air, logical yet somehow unappealing. Michael hated the idea of Olivia thinking he was avoiding her. His pride burned too fiercely. "No," he said firmly. "I'll go. In fact—" He paused, his gaze locking onto Emma. "You're coming with me." Emma blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. "I'm your secretary, Michael, not your date." "Precisely, that's why it'll work. You're not just anyone. They'll expect me to show up with someone glamorous, someone shallow. But you—" He gestured vaguely at her. "You're different. They won't see it coming." Emma's lips pressed into a thin line. "So, I'm a prop in your ego game?" Michael leaned back, flashing a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You'll be more than that. You'll be my secret weapon. I trust you, Emma, and I'm giving you full creative freedom to make an impression. What do you say?" For a long moment she studied him, weighing his words. There was something in his tone, something vulnerable beneath the bravado, that made her hesitate. Finally she sighed. "Fine. But don't expect me to be part of whatever petty scheme you're planning. If I'm going, I'll do it my way." Michael's grin widened. "That's exactly what I'm counting on." Emma walked out of the room, leaving Michael alone with his thoughts. The faintest flicker of curiosity sparked within her, though she pushed it aside. Michael Brooks was an enigma, one she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to unravel. For Michael, however, the die was cast. What he didn't know yet was that Emma's way of doing things would change everything. The following week passed in a blur of preparations. Michael's impulsive decision had turned into a surprisingly meticulous operation. His stylist, Joseph, was tasked with ensuring Emma's transformation for the event was nothing short of dazzling. Michael observed from the sidelines as racks of designer gowns and shoes were brought into his penthouse. Emma, however, remained indifferent to the pomp and excess. "You're taking this awfully seriously," Emma remarked dryly as Joseph draped her in an emerald green evening gown. "It's almost as if you're trying to impress her." Michael, seated casually on a nearby couch with his laptop, didn't look up. "It's not about her. It's about making sure I'm not seen as the loser in this story." "By walking in with a secretary in couture?" Emma smirked. "That'll show them." He finally looked up, his gaze sharp. "You underestimate yourself, Emma. That's part of the plan." Emma studied him in the mirror, her expression unreadable. "I hope you're ready for the consequences, Michael. People might start seeing you differently, too." By the time the day of the wedding arrived, Emma had undergone a transformation that left even Michael momentarily speechless. The elegant gown, paired with subtle but striking makeup and a touch of understated jewelry, made her look regal yet approachable. It wasn't just the clothes. Emma carried herself with an effortless confidence, as if she belonged in any room she entered. "You clean up well," Michael said as she descended the staircase to his waiting car. Emma rolled her eyes but allowed herself a small smile. "Let's just get this over with." The venue, a sprawling vineyard estate, was a masterpiece of sophistication. As Michael's sleek car pulled up, all eyes turned toward them. Olivia's wedding was the event of the season, and every guest seemed eager to bask in its glow. The air buzzed with anticipation as Michael and Emma stepped out together. "Ready for the circus?" Michael murmured, offering her his arm. Emma took it with a calm nod. "Always." Inside, the grandeur was overwhelming. Crystal chandeliers, tables laden with flowers, and the murmur of polite conversation filled the space. Michael's jaw tightened as he spotted Olivia across the room, radiant in her gown, surrounded by her husband-to-be and an entourage of admirers. The moment Olivia noticed them, her smile froze, and a flicker of something, surprise perhaps, crossed her face. She recovered quickly, gliding over to greet them. "Michael," she said warmly, though her eyes lingered on Emma. "You made it, and this must be—" "Emma Hayes," Michael interjected smoothly. "My partner this evening." Olivia extended a perfectly manicured hand, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Charmed. You're quite the surprise." Emma accepted the handshake with a composed smile. Surprises tend to make the best impressions, don't they? The exchange was brief but electric, and Emma's poise seemed to unsettle Olivia just enough for Michael to notice. For the first time that evening, he felt something akin to satisfaction, not because he had one-upped Olivia, but because Emma had held her own. As they moved further into the room, whispers followed in their wake. Emma was a mystery to these people, and her calm demeanor only added to their intrigue. For Michael, the night was beginning to unfold in a way he hadn't anticipated. Watching Emma navigate the crowd with grace, he couldn't shake the thought. She wasn't just his secretary tonight. She was proving to be something far more significant, and perhaps more vital to his life than he'd ever realized. The evening unfurled like a symphony of hushed whispers, stolen glances, and thinly veiled judgments. As Michael and Emma wove their way through the opulent venue, they were met with a kaleidoscope of reactions: admiration, surprise, and skepticism. For Michael, this was exactly as he had envisioned. For Emma, however, the night was already beginning to challenge her expectations. At first, Emma stayed close to Michael's side, observing silently as he made polite small talk with familiar faces from his past. The guest list was a who's who of the elite, filled with power players and old acquaintances, each eager to outshine the other. Yet Emma, with her unassuming elegance, managed to draw attention without effort. During a brief lull in the conversation, Michael leaned in and whispered, "Not bad so far. You've got half the room wondering who you are." Emma glanced sideways at him, her lips curving into a faint smile. "I thought I was just your +1, not your decoy for social mind games." Michael chuckled, his eyes briefly softening. "Trust me, Emma. Tonight you're much more than that." They approached the grand ballroom where the bride and groom were receiving guests. Olivia's husband-to-be, Charles, was every bit the archetype of a polished financier: tailored suit, a watch worth a year's salary, and a smile that seemed permanently plastered in place. Yet something about him lacked authenticity. "Michael!" Charles greeted with the enthusiasm of an old friend, though their history was anything but amicable. "I'm glad you could make it." Michael nodded, his grip firm as he shook Charles's hand. "Wouldn't miss it. Congratulations to you both." Charles's gaze shifted to Emma, lingering just long enough to make Michael's jaw tighten. "And who is this enchanting lady?" "Emma Hayes," Michael said, his voice steady. "She's my partner for the evening." Emma extended her hand with a composed smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you. You've put together quite the event." "Thank you," Charles said, his grin widening. "Though most of the credit goes to Olivia, of course." Olivia, who had been watching the exchange with a strained expression, finally spoke. "It's lovely to see you again, Michael. And Emma, you look radiant." There was a slight edge to her tone, but Emma responded with effortless poise. "Thank you, Olivia. It's an honor to be here. You must be thrilled. Everything is absolutely perfect." For a moment, Olivia seemed disarmed by Emma's sincerity. Yet beneath the surface, an unspoken tension simmered. It was clear that Olivia hadn't expected Michael to arrive with someone like Emma, someone who exuded intelligence and grace rather than mere glamour. As they moved on, Michael let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "You handled that well," he murmured. "Did you expect anything less?" Emma quipped, her confidence unshaken. But the night was far from over. An hour later, Emma found herself separated from Michael, mingling with a group of guests near the cocktail bar. Initially, she had intended to stay in the background, but her natural curiosity drew her into the conversation. The topic was venture capitalism, and one guest, a sharply dressed woman named Julia, was passionately discussing the importance of investing in ethical startups. "You seem knowledgeable about the industry," Julia remarked, turning to Emma. "Are you in finance as well?" Emma hesitated for a split second. "Not directly, but I've worked closely with Michael on several initiatives. It's fascinating to see how the right investments can drive both profit and positive change." Her response was met with nods of approval, and the conversation deepened. Emma's insights, gleaned from years of observing Michael's business acumen, surprised even herself. Before long, she was holding court, her thoughtful comments earning the respect of those around her. From across the room, Michael watched the scene unfold. He had intended for Emma to be his secret weapon, but he hadn't anticipated just how seamlessly she would navigate this world. She wasn't just holding her own, she was shining. A flicker of pride sparked within him, tempered by an unfamiliar emotion he couldn't quite place. Meanwhile, the evening took an unexpected turn. Olivia, clearly intrigued by Emma, approached her near the dessert table. The exchange began innocuously enough, with polite remarks about the food and the decorations. But soon, Olivia's true intentions became apparent. "So, Emma," Olivia said, her smile thin, "how long have you been working for Michael?" Emma glanced at her, sensing the subtext in the question. "A few years now. It's been an enlightening experience." "I'm sure it has," Olivia replied, her tone laced with condescension. "Michael has a way of making people feel indispensable. It's part of his charm." Emma's smile didn't waver. "He certainly has a way of recognizing potential in others. It's one of the things I admire about him." The words were simple, yet their impact was profound. Olivia's expression faltered, and she excused herself with a curt nod. Emma, unfazed, turned back to her plate, unaware that Michael had overheard the entire exchange. Later that night, during the toasts, Emma's moment arrived. The groom's best man had called for impromptu speeches, and to everyone's surprise, Michael stood up, glass in hand. His words were measured and diplomatic, a subtle mix of congratulations and veiled critiques that only those who knew him well could decipher. But it was Emma who stole the show. When one guest jokingly asked her to say a few words, Emma hesitated only briefly before stepping forward. Her speech was brief but poignant, blending humor with heartfelt observations about love and partnership. She concluded with a toast to the bride and groom, her voice steady and sincere. "To love," she said, raising her glass, May it always remind us of what truly matters." The room erupted into applause, and for a fleeting moment, even Olivia seemed genuinely impressed. As the night drew to a close, Michael found Emma standing alone on the balcony, gazing out at the vineyard under the moonlight. "You were incredible tonight," he said, joining her. Emma turned, her expression thoughtful. "I didn't do it for you, Michael, or for Olivia. I just wanted to be true to myself." Michael nodded, his gaze steady. "And that's exactly why you were the perfect choice." For the first time, Emma saw something genuine in his eyes, something unguarded and real. And for Michael, the realization hit him like a tidal wave. He had brought Emma here to prove a point, but somewhere along the way, she had proven something far more important to him. The party had started to wind down, though the air remained heavy with the lingering murmurs of gossip and speculation. Guests began to drift toward the exits, their laughter softening into goodbyes. Emma and Michael stayed near the balcony, their conversation unhurried yet tinged with something neither of them could name. Inside, Olivia watched them from a distance. Her new husband, Charles, was engaged in conversation with a group of investors, his loud laughter cutting through the quieter atmosphere. Olivia's gaze remained fixed on Michael and Emma, a flicker of frustration in her otherwise poised expression. "I see Michael still knows how to put on a show," Olivia murmured, her voice low as she sipped her champagne. One of her bridesmaids leaned in conspiratorially. "She's intriguing, isn't she? Emma, I mean. Not the typical arm candy he used to bring around." "Certainly not," Olivia replied, her tone sharp. "But let's not pretend Michael's capable of anything deeper than appearances. This is just another one of his stunts." The bridesmaid hesitated before nodding, sensing the bitterness beneath Olivia's polished facade. Meanwhile, Michael turned to Emma, a rare softness in his voice. "Are you ready to leave, or do you need a few more minutes to soak in the grandeur?" Emma laughed lightly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I think I've had enough of grandeur for one evening. Let's go." As they walked through the crowded foyer, heads turned to watch them. Emma's calm grace seemed to leave a trail of curiosity in her wake, while Michael's quiet confidence was a stark contrast to the boisterous energy of the other guests. Just as they reached the exit, Olivia appeared, stepping in front of them with a radiant yet tight smile. "Leaving so soon, Michael? I thought you'd at least stay to see the last dance." Michael's expression remained neutral, but Emma could feel the subtle tension in his stance. "We've had a long evening, Olivia, but congratulations again. The wedding was unforgettable." Olivia's gaze flickered to Emma. "And you, Emma? Did you enjoy yourself? It must have been quite the experience stepping into a world like this." Emma met Olivia's gaze evenly. "It was enlightening, Olivia. Thank you for having us." Olivia tilted her head, her smile sharpening. "I'm glad to hear it. You seem to handle yourself well in unexpected situations. It's a rare quality." Michael cut in smoothly, his tone cool. "Emma handles herself well in any situation. That's why she's indispensable." For a moment, Olivia said nothing, her composed mask slipping just enough for Emma to catch a glimmer of something unspoken. Then, with a faint nod, Olivia stepped aside. "Safe travels, then." As they walked out into the crisp night air, Michael exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "She never changes, does she?" Emma shrugged. "She's your ex-fiancée, Michael. I assume she knows exactly how to push your buttons." He chuckled, though there was little humor in it. "You're not wrong." They climbed into the waiting car, the silence between them not uncomfortable but contemplative. As the city lights blurred past the windows, Michael turned to Emma. "I owe you one," he said. "Tonight could have gone very differently without you." Emma arched an eyebrow. You don't owe me anything. I agreed to come knowing full well what I was walking into. That's not the point. His voice softened, and for a moment the usual sharp edges of his personality seemed to dissolve. You made me realize something tonight. Something I didn't even know I needed to see. Emma's brow furrowed slightly, but she didn't press him. Well, I'm glad I could help. The following morning, Emma arrived at the office as usual, expecting a return to the normal rhythm of their work. To her surprise, Michael was already there, sitting at his desk with a rare look of focus. You're early, Emma remarked, setting down her bag. Michael glanced up, his expression unreadable. Couldn't sleep. Too much on my mind. She didn't respond immediately, sensing there was more he wanted to say. Instead, she sat at her desk and began organizing the day's tasks. After a few minutes, Michael broke the silence. Emma. She looked up, meeting his gaze. Have you ever felt like you've been chasing the wrong things? Emma blinked, caught off guard by the sudden introspection. I think everyone questions their priorities at some point. Why do you ask? Michael leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. Last night, watching you, seeing how you handled everything, I realized how much of my life has been about proving something. To myself, to people like Olivia, to the world. But I don't even know what I've been trying to prove anymore. Emma studied him for a moment before replying. Maybe it's time to stop proving and start living. Figure out what actually matters to you, Michael, not what you think should matter. Her words hung in the air, a quiet challenge that Michael couldn't ignore. Over the next few days, Michael found himself replaying Emma's advice in his mind. For years, his life had been a relentless pursuit of success, a constant climb to higher heights. But for the first time, he wondered if the view from the top had been worth the sacrifices. Emma, meanwhile, carried on with her work, unaware of the depth of the impact she'd had on Michael. Yet there was an undeniable shift between them. Their conversations grew less transactional and more personal, their shared moments filled with a warmth that hadn't been there before. One evening, as they were wrapping up a late meeting, Michael hesitated before speaking. Emma, he said, his tone uncharacteristically hesitant. Can I ask you something? Of course, she replied, glancing up from her laptop. Why did you agree to come to the wedding? Emma paused, considering her answer. Because I thought you needed someone there to remind you of who you are, not who you think people expect you to be. Michael was silent for a long moment, her words resonating deeply. Finally, he nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. You have a way of cutting through the noise, Emma. It's refreshing. Emma chuckled softly. Someone has to keep you grounded. As they locked eyes, a quiet understanding passed between them, one that neither of them fully acknowledged, but both felt deeply. For Michael, the wedding had been a catalyst, but it was Emma who had truly shaken the foundations of his carefully constructed world. And for Emma, the experience had revealed something unexpected, that beneath Michael's polished exterior lay a man searching for something real, something lasting. And perhaps, just perhaps, they had both found what they were looking for. The office buzzed quietly with its usual rhythm of phone calls, muted conversations, and the occasional hum of a printer. Emma sat at her desk, typing an email while the sunlight filtered through the large glass windows behind her. Michael was in his office, the door slightly ajar, allowing her a glimpse of him pacing as he spoke on the phone. His voice was calm and measured, but Emma could tell from the way he ran a hand through his hair that he was navigating a particularly tricky negotiation. For most people, this scene was unremarkable, but for Emma there was a noticeable difference in Michael since the wedding. He was still driven and demanding, but something had shifted. He asked more questions, took more time to listen, and had started to show an unusual interest in the opinions of those around him. The change became most apparent that afternoon. Emma was reviewing the logistics for an upcoming charity gala that Michael's company was sponsoring when he emerged from his office. "Emma," he began, his tone casual but carrying a weight that made her glance up from her screen. "Yes," she responded, curious. Michael hesitated, his hand resting on the edge of her desk. "I've been thinking about what you said the other night, about figuring out what matters." Emma leaned back slightly, giving him her full attention. "And I think it's time we started putting more focus on projects that have a lasting impact," he said, "not just the ones that bring in quick profits." This was new. Michael had always been pragmatic in his approach to business, prioritizing results over sentiment. Emma couldn't help but feel a spark of pride as she realized her words had played a role in this shift. "That's ambitious," she said, a hint of admiration in her voice. "Do you have anything specific in mind?" Michael nodded, his eyes lighting up. "I want to expand our support for green technology startups. We've been dabbling in it, but I think we could do more. Invest in companies that are working toward real solutions, not just the ones that look good on paper." Emma smiled. "That sounds like the kind of work that could actually make a difference." He met her gaze, a flicker of vulnerability crossing his expression. "It feels right, doesn't it? Like it's something worth building." Over the next few weeks, Michael threw himself into this new initiative, and Emma was by his side every step of the way. Together, they evaluated proposals, held meetings with entrepreneurs, and began laying the groundwork for what Michael called a legacy worth leaving. It was an exciting time, but it also deepened the bond between them. One evening, after a particularly long day, they found themselves sitting in Michael's office with takeout boxes spread across his desk. The glow from the city outside cast soft shadows across the room. "I never thought I'd see the day you'd prioritize impact over the bottom line," Emma teased, stabbing her chopsticks into a carton of lo mein. Michael chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Don't give me too much credit. The bottom line still matters. I don't want it to be the only thing." Emma nodded, her expression thoughtful. "You're changing, Michael. It's a good thing." He looked at her, his gaze lingering for a moment. "Maybe it's because I've started surrounding myself with the right people." Emma's cheeks warmed, but she kept her tone light. "Let's not get sentimental. You'll ruin your reputation." They both laughed, the sound filling the quiet space around them. As the weeks turned into months, Emma began to notice subtle shifts in her own perspective. For years, she had been content in her role as Michael's secretary, valuing the stability it brought her after a chaotic period in her life. But now, working alongside Michael on these projects, she felt a growing sense of purpose, like she was contributing to something bigger than herself. One afternoon, while reviewing a potential investment, Michael turned to her with a question that caught her off guard. "Have you ever thought about what you want, Emma? Outside of this job, I mean." She hesitated, the question unearthing dreams she had long buried. "I suppose I've always wanted to do something meaningful, to make a difference in some small way. But life doesn't always give you the luxury of chasing dreams." Michael frowned slightly. "Maybe it's time you started thinking about what those dreams look like, because if anyone deserves to chase them, it's you." Emma looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "I appreciate that, Michael. But for now, I'm happy where I am." He nodded, though something in his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. As their new initiative gained traction, Emma and Michael found themselves spending even more time together. Their partnership was seamless, built on mutual respect and a shared vision. But as they grew closer, the lines between professional and personal began to blur. One evening, after a successful pitch to a group of investors, Michael invited Emma to celebrate over dinner. The restaurant was intimate and quiet, a far cry from the high-profile venues Michael usually frequented. As they shared a bottle of wine and recounted the day's victories, Emma couldn't help but feel a shift in the air. "You know," Michael said, swirling the wine in his glass, "if someone had told me a year ago that I'd be here, working on something like this, I would have laughed in their face." Emma smiled. "And now?" "Now I can't imagine doing anything else. And a lot of that is because of you, Emma." She looked at him, her heart skipping a beat at the earnestness in his tone. "You give me too much credit, Michael. This was your vision." "Maybe," he conceded. "But you gave it heart." The words hung between them, charged with a meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. As the night wore on, their conversation grew more personal. Michael spoke of his childhood, his relentless drive to escape his father's shadow, and the emptiness that success often brought. Emma shared stories of her own, of the struggles she had faced, the sacrifices she had made, and the strength she had found in rebuilding her life. By the time they left the restaurant, the connection between them felt stronger than ever. But as they stood outside, the cool night air wrapping around them, Michael hesitated. "Emma," he began, his voice soft, "there's something I need to tell you." She looked up at him, her breath catching at the vulnerability in his expression. "What is it?" He hesitated, as if searching for the right words. Before he could finish, a car pulled up to the curb, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The moment passed, and Michael stepped back, his walls sliding back into place. "Let me take you home," he said instead. Emma nodded, though the unspoken words lingered between them, leaving her wondering what he had been about to say, and whether she was ready to hear it. The next morning, Emma arrived at the office earlier than usual. The streets were quiet, the city still shaking off the last remnants of dawn. She liked the stillness of these moments, a stark contrast to the whirlwind that her days with Michael often became. As she settled at her desk, her mind replayed the events of the previous evening, the dinner, Michael's candid confessions, and the moment that had almost turned into something more. She tried to push the thoughts aside, focusing instead on the stack of files in front of her. Yet no matter how hard she tried, her mind kept circling back to the way Michael had looked at her, the words he'd left unspoken. Before she could dwell further, Michael's arrival interrupted her thoughts. He entered with his usual commanding presence, though today his demeanor seemed unusually subdued. "Good morning," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "Morning," Emma replied, studying him carefully. "You're here early." Michael nodded, setting his briefcase on his desk. "Couldn't sleep." Emma hesitated, debating whether to ask the question that had been nagging at her. Finally, she decided to take the plunge. "About last night." Michael paused, his hands resting on the back of his chair. "What about it?" "You seemed like you wanted to say something," Emma said carefully, "but you didn't." He exhaled, the tension in his shoulders visibly easing. "I did, but it wasn't the right time." Emma tilted her head, intrigued. "And now?" Michael looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Now, we have work to do." The moment passed, leaving Emma with more questions than answers. Over the following days, the tension between them lingered, unspoken but palpable. They worked together as seamlessly as ever, but there was an undercurrent of something deeper, something neither of them was ready to confront. It was during one of their planning meetings that the dynamic shifted again. They were seated in the conference room, reviewing the latest updates on their green initiative, when Michael suddenly turned to Emma. "Do you ever feel like you're holding back?" he asked abruptly. Emma blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean in life," he clarified. Do you ever feel like there's something you're not letting yourself have because it feels complicated? Emma hesitated, his question hitting closer to home than she expected. I think everyone feels that way sometimes. Why? Michael leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. Because I feel like I've been holding back for a long time, and I'm starting to think it's time I stopped. Emma's breath caught, but before she could respond, the door to the conference room opened, and one of Michael's executives stepped in with a question about the upcoming gala. The interruption broke the moment, but the weight of Michael's words stayed with Emma long after the meeting ended. As the date of the gala approached, their workload intensified. The event was shaping up to be one of the most significant in Michael's career, a culmination of their efforts to champion meaningful innovation. Emma threw herself into the preparations, grateful for the distraction from the growing complexity of her feelings for Michael. The night of the gala arrived quickly. The venue, a stunning glass-walled ballroom overlooking the city, buzzed with energy as guests mingled, their conversations a blend of excitement and anticipation. Emma, dressed in a sleek navy gown that Michael had insisted she wear, moved through the room with practiced ease, ensuring that everything was running smoothly. Michael arrived moments later, his presence commanding as always. He cut through the crowd effortlessly, pausing to shake hands and exchange pleasantries with investors and innovators alike. When he finally spotted Emma, his expression softened. "You've outdone yourself," he said, his gaze sweeping over her. Emma smiled, though she felt her heart skip a beat under his scrutiny. It was a team effort. Michael stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're too modest. This night wouldn't have happened without you." Before Emma could respond, the sound of glasses clinking drew their attention. It was time for the evening's speeches. The speeches were inspiring, a mix of gratitude and vision that highlighted the impact of their initiative. But the true highlight of the night came when Emma was unexpectedly called to the stage. "We'd like to acknowledge someone whose dedication and hard work have been instrumental in making this initiative a reality," the host announced. "Emma Hayes, please join us." The room erupted into applause as Emma, startled, glanced at Michael. He nodded, his smile encouraging. As she made her way to the stage, Emma felt a mixture of nerves and pride. Standing in front of the crowd, she took a deep breath and began to speak. "I never expected to be here tonight," she admitted, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. "But I've learned that the most meaningful opportunities often come when you least expect them. This initiative isn't just about innovation. It's about believing in the power of people to make a difference. And for that, I have to thank Michael Brooks for his vision and for trusting me to help bring it to life." Her words were met with a standing ovation, and as she returned to her seat, Michael leaned in and whispered, "You were incredible." The night continued with an air of celebration, but for Michael and Emma, the gala marked a turning point. As the final guests began to leave, they found themselves alone on the balcony, overlooking the glittering city below. "This feels like the end of a chapter," Emma said softly, her hands resting on the cool metal railing. "Or the beginning of a new one," Michael countered, his voice equally quiet. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their unspoken feelings hanging between them. Finally, Michael turned to her. "Emma," he began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I've been thinking about what you said, about figuring out what matters. And I think I've finally realized what that is." Emma looked at him, her heart pounding. "What do you mean?" Michael hesitated, the vulnerability in his eyes unmistakable. You're what matters, Emma." Her breath hitched, the words taking her completely by surprise. "Michael, I know this complicates everything," he continued, his voice firm despite the uncertainty in his gaze. "But I've spent too much of my life holding back, and I don't want to do that anymore. Not when it comes to you." Emma felt a surge of emotions, shock, disbelief, and something that felt dangerously close to hope. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Instead, they stood there, the city lights reflecting in their eyes as they faced a future that had suddenly become infinitely more complicated and infinitely more promising. The city's lights flickered like scattered diamonds against the night sky. But for Emma, the world had narrowed to just the two of them. Michael's words hung between them, raw and unpolished, yet imbued with a vulnerability she hadn't expected. "You," he'd said. "You're what matters." Emma's pulse thundered in her ears. She wasn't sure what she'd anticipated in that moment, but the simplicity and honesty of his confession left her breathless. "Michael," she began, her voice soft yet unsteady. This changes everything." "It doesn't have to," he replied quickly, stepping closer. His eyes searched hers, the flicker of uncertainty betraying his otherwise confident demeanor. "I know it's a lot. I know it complicates things, but I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. Not after everything we've been through." Emma turned away, her hands gripping the railing of the balcony. The cool metal grounded her as her thoughts raced. She had always seen Michael as untouchable, a force of nature focused solely on his goals. But now, as he stood beside her, he felt more real and more dangerous to her carefully constructed boundaries than ever before. "I need time," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Time to figure out what this means, for both of us." Michael nodded, though his disappointment was evident. "Take all the time you need," he said gently. "I'm not going anywhere." The following weeks were a blur of activity as they finalized the post-gala projects, but the tension between Emma and Michael was palpable. They continued to work seamlessly together, but the unspoken emotions between them lingered like a quiet storm. Emma tried to compartmentalize her feelings, focusing instead on the task at hand. The Green Initiative was gaining traction, attracting attention from media outlets and high-profile investors. It was everything they had hoped for, yet Emma couldn't fully enjoy the success. Her moments alone were consumed by questions she couldn't answer. Could she allow herself to blur the lines between her professional relationship with Michael and the personal connection that had undeniably deepened? What if things didn't work out? The stakes were higher than ever, and Emma wasn't sure she was ready to gamble. Michael, for his part, gave her space. He didn't bring up their conversation on the balcony, but his actions spoke volumes. He sought her input on decisions he once would have made alone, offered small gestures of gratitude, and listened in ways that felt deeply intentional. One evening, as they prepared for another investor meeting, Michael broke the silence. "Emma," he said, his tone unusually soft. She looked up from her laptop, her heart skipping a beat at the way he said her name. "I just wanted to say thank you," he continued, "for everything, for being here, for believing in this project, and in me." Emma blinked, caught off guard by his sincerity. "Michael, you don't need to thank me. This was always a team effort." He smiled faintly, shaking his head. "You don't give yourself enough credit. None of this would have been possible without you." Before she could respond, the arrival of the investors interrupted the moment, but the warmth of his words stayed with her long after the meeting ended. A week later, Emma found herself at her favorite cafe, the comforting hum of conversation and clinking cups providing a welcome reprieve from the intensity of the office. She stared into her steaming cup of tea, her thoughts once again circling back to Michael. "Lost in thought?" a familiar voice interrupted. Emma glanced up, startled to see Olivia standing before her. The last person she expected to run into, Olivia looked as composed as ever, her designer coat and polished demeanor a stark contrast to Emma's simple outfit. "Olivia," Emma said, straightening in her chair. What brings you here? Olivia smiled, though the gesture didn't quite reach her eyes. A meeting nearby. And you? Just taking a break, Emma replied cautiously. Olivia hesitated before sitting across from her. You know, I've been hearing a lot about the Green Initiative. People are really impressed. Emma nodded, unsure where the conversation was headed. It's been a lot of hard work, but we're proud of what we've accomplished. Michael must be thrilled, Olivia remarked, her tone casual, yet laced with something Emma couldn't quite place. He is, Emma said simply, unwilling to delve deeper. Olivia leaned forward slightly, her expression turning serious. Emma, I'm going to give you some advice. Be careful with Michael. Emma frowned, taken aback. What do you mean? He has a way of pulling people in, Olivia continued, making them feel indispensable. But when things get complicated, he shuts down. He doesn't mean to hurt people, it's just how he is. Emma's chest tightened, her instincts telling her there was more to Olivia's words than mere concern. Why are you telling me this? Olivia studied her for a moment before standing. Because I've been where you are, and I know how it ends. Without another word, Olivia left, leaving Emma with a storm of emotions she couldn't quite sort through. That evening, Emma replayed the conversation with Olivia in her mind. Was there truth in her warning, or was it the bitterness of an ex-fiancé trying to stir doubt? Emma wanted to believe in the Michael she had come to know, the man who had changed, who had shown her glimpses of vulnerability and authenticity. As she sat alone in her apartment, her phone buzzed with a message from Michael. Are you free tomorrow evening? I want to show you something. Emma stared at the screen, her heart pounding. After a moment, she typed her reply. Yes. The next evening, Michael picked her up in his car, the atmosphere between them charged with anticipation. He drove them out of the city, the skyline fading into the distance as they approached a quiet, open expanse of land. What is this place? Emma asked as they stepped out of the car, the cool night air wrapping around them. It's the site for our next project, Michael explained, gesturing toward the empty field. A state-of-the-art research and development facility for renewable energy. I wanted you to see it first. Emma looked at him, her breath catching at the intensity in his gaze. Michael, this is incredible. It's just the beginning, he said, his voice softening. But I couldn't have gotten here without you. She smiled, though her heart ached with the weight of everything left unsaid. You've come a long way, Michael, and you should be proud of that. I am, he admitted, but I'm also scared, because I don't want to lose what we've built. Not just this, but us. Emma froze, his words cutting through her defenses. Michael, I know I can't ask you to take that leap, he said quickly, but I need you to know how I feel. Whatever happens, I don't want there to be any doubt. For a long moment they stood in silence, the vastness of the night sky stretching above them. Finally, Emma took a step closer, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Michael, this isn't easy for me, she began, but I don't want to hold back anymore either. His eyes widened, a flicker of hope breaking through the tension. Emma. She smiled faintly, her heart pounding as she took his hand. Let's figure it out. Together. As the stars shimmered above, they stood on the edge of something new. Uncertain, yes, but filled with the promise of everything they had yet to discover. The days following their quiet moment under the stars were a whirlwind of emotions and activity. Michael and Emma had crossed an unspoken threshold, their tentative agreement to explore what lay between them, subtly altering the dynamics of their relationship. Yet neither was ready to completely abandon their professional roles, and so they moved forward with a careful balance of restraint and curiosity. At the office, their interactions retained their usual efficiency, though an undercurrent of warmth seemed to color their conversations. Michael, once known for his brusque manner, now showed a newfound patience in their meetings. Emma, for her part, found herself more attuned to his vulnerabilities, her usual sharp wit tempered by an emerging tenderness. The first true test of their fledgling connection came during a critical board meeting to finalize plans for the renewable energy facility. The project had drawn significant attention from stakeholders, and tensions were running high. "Michael, these numbers are promising, but the risk is substantial," one board member said, frowning as he adjusted his glasses. "Are we certain this is the right direction?" Michael, seated at the head of the table, leaned forward. "I understand the concern, but this isn't just about numbers. This is about positioning ourselves as leaders in an industry that's shaping the future. The potential return far outweighs the risk." Another member chimed in, her tone skeptical. "It's a bold move, no doubt, but bold doesn't always mean wise." As murmurs of agreement rippled through the room, Emma interjected. "If I may," she began, her voice calm but firm. All eyes turned to her, and Michael's expression softened as he gestured for her to continue. "This initiative isn't just a business decision," Emma said, meeting the gaze of each board member in turn. "It's a statement, a commitment to innovation and responsibility. Yes, there are risks, but that's true of any meaningful endeavor. The question is, do we want to lead or follow?" Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, the room was silent. Then, one by one, the board members nodded, their skepticism giving way to a grudging respect. "Well said," the first board member conceded. "Let's proceed with the proposal." Michael shot Emma a subtle smile, his gratitude evident. Later that evening, as the office emptied and the city lights began to twinkle against the darkening sky, Michael found Emma at her desk, reviewing the final details from the meeting. "You were incredible today," he said, leaning against the doorframe. Emma glanced up, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "Just doing my job." Michael stepped closer, his tone softening. "It was more than that. You didn't just defend the project, you inspired them. You inspired me." Emma looked away, her heart skipping a beat at the intensity of his gaze. "I couldn't have done it without you, Michael. You set the vision." He chuckled, running a hand through his hair. "Maybe, but you gave it a voice, and I'll never stop being grateful for that." For a moment, neither of them spoke, the quiet hum of the city outside filling the space between them. "Dinner?" Michael asked suddenly, his tone casual but his eyes betraying a hint of hope. Emma hesitated, then smiled. "I'd like that." Dinner that night was different from their previous outings. Instead of a high-end restaurant, Michael suggested a cozy bistro tucked away on a quiet street. The atmosphere was intimate and unpretentious, a reflection of the subtle shifts in their relationship. As they shared a bottle of wine and plates of rustic pasta, their conversation flowed easily, touching on everything from childhood memories to future dreams. "You know," Michael said, swirling his wine thoughtfully, "for years I thought success was about building something that couldn't be torn down, a legacy of steel and glass. But now—" "Now?" Emma prompted gently. "Now I think it's about the people you share it with," he admitted, his gaze steady on hers. "The ones who challenge you, who make you better." Emma's breath hitched, the sincerity in his words stirring something deep within her. "Michael, I—" Before she could finish, a familiar voice interrupted. "Michael Brooks, fancy seeing you here." They both turned to see Olivia standing at the edge of their table, her polished appearance a stark contrast to the bistro's warm simplicity. "Olivia," Michael said, his tone measured, "what brings you here?" "Dinner meeting," she replied smoothly, her eyes flicking to Emma. "And you?" "I see you're keeping interesting company," Emma stiffened, but Michael placed a reassuring hand on hers under the table. "Emma's not company," he said firmly. "She's my partner, in every sense of the word." Olivia's smile faltered, a flash of something unspoken passing through her eyes. "Well, I won't intrude. Enjoy your evening." As she walked away, Emma let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Are you okay?" Michael asked, concern lacing his voice. Emma nodded, her composure returning. "I am. But I think that was a reminder of how complicated this could get." Michael's jaw tightened, his resolve clear. "Let it get complicated. You're worth it, Emma." In the weeks that followed, their relationship deepened, both professionally and personally. They navigated the challenges of blending their roles with a careful balance of honesty and discretion, their mutual respect laying a strong foundation. But as their bond grew, so did the stakes. Their work became intertwined with their emotions, and with success came scrutiny. Rumors began to circulate within the industry, whispers of a deeper connection between Michael and his trusted secretary. Emma, ever practical, addressed the elephant in the room one evening as they reviewed a new proposal. "Michael, we need to talk about appearances," she said, setting down her pen. He looked up, his brow furrowed. "What about them?" "People are starting to notice," she said carefully. "And while I don't regret anything, I don't want it to overshadow the work we've done." Michael leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "You're right. We need to be smart about this. But Emma, I won't hide how I feel. Not anymore." She smiled softly, her heart swelling at his determination. "Then we'll face it together." And together they did. The culmination of their efforts came months later at the grand opening of the renewable energy facility. The event was a triumph, attended by industry leaders, media, and government officials. Michael and Emma stood side by side as the ribbon was cut, their shared vision finally realized. As the crowd erupted into applause, Michael turned to Emma, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "This is just the beginning," he said, "for us." Emma looked up at him, her eyes shining with a mix of pride and affection. "It always has been." And in that moment, as they stood on the cusp of a future they had built together, the world felt full of infinite possibilities. The months following the grand opening of the renewable energy facility were a testament to the power of shared vision. Michael and Emma's partnership, now both professional and deeply personal, blossomed as they navigated new challenges together. The project was gaining national recognition, and their collective work was setting a new standard for innovation and responsibility in the corporate world. But with success came new tensions. Their relationship, though carefully managed, was becoming an open secret. Industry whispers had turned into bold assumptions, and some colleagues and stakeholders questioned whether personal feelings could cloud professional judgment. One morning, as Emma reviewed a memo at her desk, Michael appeared in her doorway, his expression unusually serious. "We need to talk," he said, his tone clipped. Emma glanced up, her chest tightening at the edge in his voice. "What's wrong?" Michael stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I just got off a call with the board. They're concerned about appearances." Emma frowned, setting her papers aside. "Let me guess. They're worried about us." Michael nodded, his jaw tightening. "They didn't say it outright, but it's clear they think our relationship could be a liability." Emma exhaled, her mind racing. "What are they suggesting?" "They want us to put distance between ourselves," Michael said reluctantly. "At least publicly. They think it'll protect the company's reputation." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Emma's hands rested on the desk, her fingers curling slightly as she absorbed the weight of his words. "And what do you think?" she asked finally. Michael's gaze softened, his voice steady. I think it's ridiculous. You've done nothing but excel in your role. If anything, you've made this company stronger. But I also think we need to be strategic. Emma nodded slowly, her practical side taking over. So we maintain professionalism at work and keep our personal lives private. It's not ideal, but it's manageable. Michael stepped closer, his frustration giving way to concern. I don't want this to push you away, Emma. I've spent too much of my life letting other people dictate my happiness. I won't let that happen again. Emma met his gaze, her expression softening. We'll handle this, Michael. Together. In the weeks that followed, they carefully adjusted their behavior at work. Public interactions were strictly professional, their conversations in meetings focused solely on business. Yet, behind closed doors, they clung to the moments they could steal. A quiet dinner at home, a shared glance during a meeting, a lingering touch before parting ways. The balancing act wasn't easy, but it reinforced the strength of their connection. They knew what they had was worth fighting for, even if the world demanded they tread carefully. One evening, as they sat in Michael's apartment reviewing proposals for their next project, Emma leaned back with a sigh, her eyes drifting toward the skyline outside. "Do you ever wonder if it's worth it?" she asked quietly. Michael looked up from his laptop, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "All of it," she said, gesturing vaguely. "The work, the sacrifices, the scrutiny. Sometimes it feels like we're constantly trying to prove ourselves to people who will never really understand." Michael set his laptop aside, moving to sit beside her. "I won't lie to you, Emma. There are times I've questioned everything. But then I look at what we've accomplished, the lives we've impacted, the changes we've set in motion, and I know it's worth it." She smiled faintly, her gaze meeting his. "And what about us? Are we worth it?" Michael cupped her face gently, his eyes unwavering. "You're worth everything." The words lingered in the air, a quiet affirmation of their commitment to each other. Their resolve was tested again when a major investor voiced concerns about the company's leadership. During a tense conference call, the investor hinted that Michael's judgment might be compromised by his personal life. Emma sat silently beside Michael, her jaw tightening as she listened to the thinly veiled insinuations. When the call ended, Michael turned to her, his frustration evident. "This is getting out of hand," he said. "They're using our relationship as an excuse to undermine everything we've built." Emma placed a hand on his arm, her voice calm but firm. "Then we remind them why they believed in you in the first place. Focus on the work, Michael. The results will speak for themselves." He nodded, her steady presence grounding him once again. "You're right, as always." The next few months were a whirlwind of activity as Michael and Emma doubled down on their efforts. They launched new initiatives, expanded partnerships, and secured groundbreaking deals that silenced even their harshest critics. The company's success became undeniable, and the whispers about their relationship began to fade into the background. But just as they began to feel a sense of stability, an unexpected challenge arose. Olivia re-entered the picture, this time as a representative for a rival company bidding for a lucrative government contract. During a high-stakes meeting, Olivia's polished demeanor and sharp wit were on full display. She greeted Michael and Emma with a thinly veiled smile, her words dripping with calculated charm. "Well, isn't this a surprise?" Olivia said, her eyes flicking between them. The dynamic duo. Emma remained composed, her tone even as she replied, "It's always a pleasure, Olivia. Let's get to business." The negotiations were intense, each side presenting compelling arguments for why they deserved the contract. Olivia, ever the strategist, attempted to sow doubt by subtly questioning Michael's priorities. "Michael, I have to wonder," she said during a break. "With so much on your plate, are you sure you can give this project the attention it deserves?" Michael's jaw tightened, but Emma spoke up before he could respond. "We wouldn't be here if we weren't fully prepared," she said firmly. "Our track record speaks for itself." Olivia's smile faltered, her gaze narrowing slightly. "Of course, I meant no offense." As the meeting resumed, Michael and Emma's unified front proved unshakable. Their proposal was ultimately selected, a victory that cemented their reputation as a formidable team. That evening, as they celebrated their win over a quiet dinner, Michael raised his glass to Emma. "To the smartest, most resilient partner I've ever had," he said, his voice warm. Emma smiled, clinking her glass against his. "And to the man who never stopped surprising me." As they sipped their wine, a sense of calm settled over them. The challenges they had faced had only strengthened their bond, and for the first time in months, they allowed themselves to simply enjoy the moment. Michael reached across the table, taking Emma's hand in his. "You know, I used to think success was about being the best, about proving something to the world. But now I realize it's about who you have beside you when you cross the finish line." Emma's heart swelled, her voice soft as she replied, "And I'm proud to be beside you, Michael. Every step of the way."
If you're excited about this story, please let us know. If you enjoyed the video, please press 1. If not, press 0. Your feedback has inspired me to collect more uplifting and meaningful stories.